You know, since I'm going to be talking about high altitude climbing, Dave said it would be okay with him if we refrigerate the room and suck the oxygen out. You know, I'm just going to do a brief recap of what I talked about last year. I've been climbing now for almost 40 years, so I'm a little older than Rebecca, but we similarly took different paths in life. They're not normal paths, but I chose climbing because of the challenge and the fact that I like things that are difficult and long-term, and there's planning and there's preparation, and ultimately, because of all that, there's great reward and huge satisfaction. And that to me is very addicting. But this is an arena that, as you probably know as well, is very dangerous. And people often question, why do we want to go into this dangerous arena? Am I a risk seeker? But ultimately, I decided that no, I was going to be a risk manager, because my primary goal in climbing these mountains was not to get to the top, but ultimately to stay alive. And I think my plan worked out. I'm here today. So I think you can be successful in a dangerous environment. It might take longer. You have to have more patience, more persistence, and think about what you're doing, and only proceed when conditions allow. People often ask, you know, how I got into climbing. I read a book as a kid. I was growing up in the great mountaineering state of Illinois, and I read this story of an expedition that took place in 1950 to a mountain called Annapurna. And this mountain, you know, it's a story of 8 climbers under great leadership. 8 of them went literally off the map, spent 3 months on this mountain, and in the end, 2 of them got to the top. So there's that very altruistic definition of the word teamwork. Everybody works together to achieve a goal, and 1 or 2 people succeed in accolade, but everybody helps and revels in that success. So I was so enamored by that book, I decided that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to climb big mountains. So first of all, I had to get the hell out of Illinois. I moved to Seattle to go to college. I wanted to be a veterinarian. I went to school for 8 years, got a degree in veterinary medicine. But during that time, I climbed voraciously. And my primary objective in the Seattle area was Mount Rainier. It's high enough, it's 14,000 feet, it's got the altitude, it's steep, it's glaciated, you know, the weather sucks. Whatever I could learn on that mountain, I figured that mountain would be a stepping stone to take me to the bigger mountains of the world. And I became a guide on Rainier as well. And because of my 20 years of guiding, I've climbed to the summit now 215 times. But I learned so much as a guide about how to be safe, how to be conservative, how to be thoughtful. You know, we have customers that are with us. And I kind of say that we perform what I call the ultimate form of customer service. We have to keep our customers alive, right? So they can become repeat customers. But we also want to make sure that they have a great experience. It's all about giving them a great experience. The biggest lesson I learned, I think, as a guide was the fact that we need to listen to the mountain. We need to listen to the environment. It dictates what we get to do, whether we proceed, whether we hold fast, or whether we go down. So that, for me, was a huge lesson. I started to think then maybe someday I could go to Mount Everest, 29,000 feet high. And when you think about Everest, you've heard a lot of people have climbed it, over 3,000 people. And this is what somebody looks like when they climb Everest. They use supplemental oxygen because they want to succeed at all costs. It doesn't matter how they climb it. They want to get to the top. But for me, using supplemental oxygen to climb a 29,000-foot mountain seemed to be a contrived way to succeed. Basically, you're reducing the mountain to your level rather than to climb it at its level. So my rule became something that I lived by was not to use supplemental oxygen. It was more important how I climbed these mountains rather than if I did climb these mountains. So after 10 years of climbing, I got invited to go to Mount Everest. We spent 3 months on the mountain, and in the end, two of us on the team, got to make the final push to the summit, and we had to stop 300 feet from the top. Imagine having to make that decision, all that money, time, investment, energy, that sunk cost, and you're faced with the summit 300 feet away, and conditions are telling you to turn around and walk away. Most people don't. That's why people die in the mountains. But that climb was a big lesson for me. It wasn't a failure. It was simply a non-success. We weren't allowed to go to the top. And I knew if I persevered and worked hard, I could get to the summit. And here I am on the summit. This was my 3rd expedition to the mountain. So it took me 3 expeditions to get to the summit of Mount Everest. After Everest, this is from the summit. You know, we can see other peaks, Makalu in the foreground, Kanchenjunga in the distance. I decided then to climb other 8,000 meter peaks. There's 14 mountains in the world over 8,000 meters. This is Kanchenjunga, 28,200 feet, a little steeper than Everest, 3,000 feet of ice that we had to climb. And here we are on the summit. You know, this is at 28,000 feet. This is cruising altitude of most jets, and here we are hanging out. After Kanchenjunga and after Everest, I decided what's next. I thought K2, which we call the Holy Grail, would be my next objective. This is the hardest peak of the 8,000 meters category. I went there with a friend from Seattle. We battled on this mountain. We had very, very difficult terrain to overcome, and the higher you go on this mountain, the steeper it gets. This mountain is relentless. We were relentless, and because of that, we succeeded in climbing to the summit of K2. This is one of the hardest mountains in the world, and when we climbed this, for the previous 7 years, nobody had succeeded, although 35 expeditions had succeeded, had attempted it. And I decided ultimately it was mind over matter. No matter how hard something is, if you don't mind, it doesn't matter. And that's how you succeed in doing what you're doing. So by default and accidentally, I'd climbed now the 3 highest mountains in the world, and I hadn't planned on that. And I said, what's next? What's my next goal? I thought, why not try to climb all 14 of these 8,000 meter peaks? You know, I'd done 3, there's only 11 left. And so I thought this would be an amazing journey. Could take 15 years, 20 years, I didn't care. I thought this would be a cool thing to do. The one thing I didn't have was the money. How was I going to pay for all these climbs? So I went out and marketed myself, and I talked to a lot of companies, and because of that, it looked like a race car driver. You know, you got logos and flags and hats and caps, but that's then how I was able to support my habit of climbing all these 8,000 meter peaks. And ultimately, to succeed on these 14 peaks, I had to make 21 separate attempts. So for every 3 climbs, 2 of them were successful. But out of every 3 climbs, 1 of them wasn't. And I learned, you know, that was the rules of the game. I wasn't always going to reach the top. I wasn't going to always succeed. And for every climb that I went on, I decided, you know, I'm not going to break the rules that I've lived by. Even though I became a professional, even though I became highly experienced, I didn't want to start taking shortcuts, and I didn't want to start to become complacent. Throughout this event and through this journey as well, I kept going to Everest. I went on 11 separate Everest expeditions. And in 1996, I was invited to join a team. I would be the leader of this climb, and the tough part of this climb we'd be trying to take a 40-pound camera, an IMAX camera, to the summit. So we've got this camera to schlep to the top, and we've also got to negotiate difficult terrain on Everest. You bring ladders with you to climb through the icefall. We build bridges with these ladders. And during all of this as well, we're filming ourselves as we're doing it. In the midst of this, if you've read the book Into Thin Air by John Krakauer, it details what happened in 1996, and we witnessed all this. On May 8th, 1996, 2 expeditions joined forces, and they pushed their way to the top. And this is on a day that we as a team decided not to go to the top. The end result was that 8 people died in a storm high on Everest. We got involved in the rescue. We eventually, 2 weeks later, went back up the mountain, deciding that we as a team hadn't done anything wrong. And we went back up, and we were gifted, I think, with this beautiful, beautiful summit day. This is an actual piece of footage from the IMAX film that was released a year later, titled Everest, becoming the largest grossing IMAX film in history. And for me, the highlight of that climb was to finally see the damn camera on the top. After that, you know, I was halfway through my career. I came home, I kept climbing, and over the next 9 years, I kept plugging away, climbing peak after peak after peak, and eventually, after 18 years, I had 1 mountain left. And that mountain was Annapurna, the mountain that I read about as a kid. Turns out this is one nasty, dangerous mountain. And I had to try 3 times to climb this mountain until finally, on that 3rd attempt, all the conditions were good enough and safe enough based on my level of acceptable risk to allow me to make the final ascent to the top. It wasn't easy, it wasn't safe, but then finally I sat on the summit of my 14th peak, and this was an 18-year journey. Imagine taking 18 years to do something, and just near the end, you're almost not allowed to succeed. One of the best days of my life. Why was Annapurna at the end? It kind of had to be. I needed 30 years of experience to succeed on Annapurna and also to survive Annapurna. And the book that put me on this journey, my life had now come full circle. If you get a chance to read this book, it's an amazing story, the last sentence of which is something that I live by. Maurice Herzog, the author, says that we all have our own Annapurnas. You know, life is a series of climbing mountains. Every day, every year, we're climbing a new mountain. And it's so cool to have these challenges. But I truly believe that the success that we all have in whatever we do, that it's one of those P's that Dave talks about, it's passion. Without passion, you're not willing to take the time to have the journey, to roll up your sleeves, and to fight your way to the top. Thank you so much, and you're going to have one of my books in your bags. Take the time to read it if you like. It's kind of my whole story in full. It's sold quite well for a climbing book, over 200,000 copies, but I have people in the business world that said I would have sold even more had I changed the title slightly. And they said it should have been Shortcuts to the Top. Thank you very much.